Hi, and welcome. This event, of course, is supposed to be, or was supposed to be, at the Greene Space. But obviously we're not there. We're at, this is my old 1800 Dutch barn in the Catskills, which I use as a kind of practice retreat, and a place where I pretend to garden and farm as best I can. And unfortunately, my piano needs a lot of love. It's been up here being beat on for many, many years, and I apologize for that in advance. Hopefully, you'll be forgiving at this difficult time, and we'll still be able to talk about Bach and think about Bach in a way that brings some comfort and joy. The original title of this talk, and is sort of still the title, is Greatest Hits of the Waltz-Tempered Clavier, which I am a little bit uncomfortable with. I don't like the idea of greatest hits or whatever. I think the whole piece is a greatest hit. But we're going to hit what I think some people would consider some of the greatest hits. And I also have another agenda, which is something that I've been thinking about so much since I started working on this piece 18 months ago. When I started practicing it, I felt that I was plugged into a kind of contentment that I wasn't used to having. Maybe something I would find with yoga or some other meditation or something, but it made me feel a kind of happiness and a kind of at oneness with time that I wasn't really used to. And I would become very annoyed when I had to go do real life things like the grocery shopping or cooking or any other thing. I just wanted to be back at home with my Bach, and I began to write about this phenomenon, like how does it happen? How does Bach create this feeling? And you might ask, if you analyze how Bach creates happiness, does it do us any good? And I think the answer is, in some ways it does. There's this kind of unending mystery of how Bach, what's the phrase I'm looking for? He manages to create and sustain the happiness, even in sort of leading it through episodes of light and dark. And I think that definitely right now, since happiness feels different now than it did a few months ago, the things we're grateful for are different. Right now, this bit of Bach, this aspect of Bach's work is worth investigating a little bit more. So I thought I'd start with the C-sharp Major Prelude and Fugue, which I think is the greatest. It's one of my favorite ones. A very difficult piece, especially the Fugue, but also deeply, deeply joyful. And one of the things that Bach makes us do, I think that's essential to his way of creating this feeling, is making us listen to fundamental things, making us hear them. The first gesture of this piece is an arc up and down. And the same arc in the left hand. And it's a very simple piece of, if I want to be jargony with you, it's a simple piece of musical construction of counterpoint that's just parallel thirds. With a peak here, he makes us hear it. And then again now, it becomes, by the mysteries of invertible counterpoint, parallel sixths. But still the most beautiful note is there on the sixth scale. He makes us hear it once and then twice, patiently. Within it, there's a kind of a leaping idea, which is interesting. The left hand. So on one level, you have this beautiful continuous motion, linear, gliding, and on another, within it, you have this beautiful energy of a million different intervals, up and down, a fifth, a fourth, all these different things that are possible. So Bach's creating an image of two things in a way. And then, after he does it, right hand, left hand, he makes us hear it two more times, but now translated into the minor. I can't overstate how important this is, this question of, because the whole piece is divided into minor and then major, right? Major, minor, major prelude and fugue, minor, each time we keep hearing these poles against each other. And so it's so beautiful now because we hear the same arc, but it feels quite different. What we heard the first time, it goes to the major sixth, and now it goes to the minor sixth. And now the left hand. That's a lot of times to hear that one idea, especially as it's so patient, we know it's unfolding. And this Bach teaches us a bit of patience at times. And now the piece gets a little more impatient, as it needs to. He halves the duration of the units, and he does a new, more active 16th. And he gets more active with the leaping idea too. So then now he gives us four bar units, and all going to the middle. There's no way to know where this is going to land. It's so modulatory, and it lands us marvelously at this chord. This chord is F sharp major. It's what we call the subdominant. It's a very special harmony they usually use at codas of pieces to create a sense of relaxation or a new perspective. And in a way, what it does is enable Bach to return to the original key, C sharp major, by the back door in a kind of mysterious second entrance. Yeah? So here we are in beautiful... the same arc. He wants you to hear it. Let's read it one more time and then look. We're back. Just like the beginning. And after all that patience and hearing arcs and various things, suddenly the piece turns into a rapid fire thing, a virtuoso thing. We had right hand and then left hand, 4 bars at a time, 8 bars at a time, going back and forth, and now suddenly the right and left hand are alternating every 16th note. Now he wants us to really hear this back and forth between the hands, so he does a downward arpeggio on the left hand and an upward one, but the right hand is one note behind. They do it again. And then a marvelous thing, 4 notes in the left hand, 3, and the 5, and the right hand follows 2 beats behind. You have the sense of Bach at play here, Whatever the energy, whatever the lyrical energy of the previous was, there was some other energy hidden within it, and you have the feeling now it's kind of unleashed. 2 extra bars with this marvelous dissonance, and then the hands doing a giant somersault. 3 big chords. After all that flighty, wild music, we need some sort of gravity to bring the piece to a finish. The Fugue is also wonderful, and it does many visits some of the same sites. I often think about, we tend to label the themes of fugues as subjects, which is a terrible, terrible name for something. Essays have subjects and school subjects and all these things. But I often think about these themes or subjects or whatever you want to call them as having a sort of balletic quality. They have a kinetic. Bach chooses them in order to have a kind of gestural energy, like a leap or one thing counterposing another. Like there's a little bit of friction or conflict or something within the idea that is essential to the unfolding of the whole fugue. This one is one of his most charming and delightful subjects. It has a opening kind of what I would call a somersault around. So it begins with a pickup on G sharp, and then there's a little turn which goes up to the E sharp and then back to the same G sharp. But inevitably in this piece, the second G sharp is on a different harmony. We don't know that at the beginning, but we will find out. The trick is that it starts on the same note, but by the time it lands, after this little somersault, the harmony is different. And then it has to figure out what to do with itself. Consonance to dissonance here, and then this. And the other thing is, basically the gesture of this, if you reduce this subject to its essence, it's a G sharp with a little, and then it goes down the scale. Boom, 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 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So in a way you might say it's like a dance about a scale. And all these little boom, 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 marvelous leaps back and forth. Again, I think of a ballet dancer. Boom, 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 boom. They have such wonderful, there's dissonance there, dissonance there. There's so many ways to play it. You could play it long. I mean, I've toyed with all of them. But the gesture is so clear, this back and forth within a very simple descending framework. And there's a little bit the pun between those two things that makes it so charming. And so so the second voice comes in, of course. Marvelously, right before the third voice comes in, there's this little kick in the reverse. That little grace note there tells me that Bach is smiling. He wants us to, obviously. The third voice, dissonance. Releasing away. Now we have, of course, which we need. There's not that much material in this fugue, so it has a basic subject, and then it has another thing, which is an episode. We call them episodes, like episodes of Netflix, of course. An episode is anything that's not the main thing. And in this case, you have two voices. One goes like that, the other responds. The other one goes, the other one goes. In a way, you would hear this better if it was two violins. At the center of this episode idea is this galloping. Meanwhile, the cello has a wild solo. It's wonderful, that continuity, and also the way that the cello goes down. Amount of activity that really conceals just a very simple motion. 4 notes, just like the end of the fugue, but it takes 4 bars to do it. It's time for another episode, and he rewrites the episode now almost immediately using that same idea, but landing in a very different place. Fine, we're there. Here comes suddenly the plot thickens, and we know the plot thickens partly because he puts that marvelous ornament at the top of it. And it's a diminished 7th chord, which is often a chord that has a kind of drama or anxiety to it, but in this case seems to be basically playful. And as I said, one of the most important elements of the Well-Timbered Clavier is how these joyful ideas keep being passed through to the minor key and become darker and different and then recover back. And the same thing is true of the minor key fugues. They go start in the minor darkly, and then they have these amazing episodes of light, and that is part of the great joy of these pieces, is watching him transfer from one world to another. So here we've got this diminished seventh chord, and we're in D sharp minor. It's not really worth knowing that, but it is in wonderful dissonance again. You hear the dissonance more in the minor, I think. And we have the episode again. Same in F minor. He really wants you to know you're in F minor. But then it all dissolves in a moment. The subject, and we're back in the original key somehow. In the middle voice, that minor key moment was only fleeting, and now another episode leads us into an even more extraordinary turn of events. Another diminished seventh chord. We seem to be in G sharp minor, maybe another dark episode, but suddenly he does what I'd call kind of an apocalypse of this episode idea, the galloping. Here's what happened. Absolutely, in musicological terms, goes bananas on that idea. So much so that it's often easy to screw it up. And what's so marvelous, so you have this wild ride. And just like in the prelude, we land back at the subdominant. This beautiful F major. The theme's back, but it's not really grounded yet. It keeps repeating the first bit of itself, but it can't find its conclusion, right? Over and over again. It skips it again. This kind of wonderful almost horn call thing. Here we are. It's very unusual also that at this point Bach repeats the first three voices coming in. He really wants to sense that we've returned after all that adventuring and minor key. Yeah? And so here we are. Middle voice. Bottom voice. And now we do a beautiful coda going to the subdominant again. F sharp. And then descending by pitch. Down from F sharp. Down the four notes we need to get back home to the very way the first subject ends. D sharp, C sharp, one last time, and on the last note a little interruption. Just like in the prelude, a set of suddenly big chords to kind of corral the joyful and fleet music before. It's a perfect little pair of pieces, one of my favorite ones to practice early in the morning, especially because it's a great finger warm-up, among other things. Very complicated, as any pianist or harpsichordist will tell you. The C minor Prelude and Fugue from Book 1 of the WTC is, of course, one of the greatest hits. You hear it so often. I hear students play it. And whenever I hear it or play it myself, I get this weird feeling of and maybe slightly influenced by certain Gothic movies or horror movies. But Bach as the mad scientist. The WTC is theoretically a learning piece, a teaching piece for young composers or young keyboardists or whatever, but it has a tremendous amount of sort of dark matter in it, you might say, pieces that go off the rails that they themselves have created. And I think we wouldn't love Bach as much if, on top of the cerebral control and the order and all the symmetry and the sense of the cosmos, if it didn't also have this darker energy with this wilder, disruptive energy underneath it as a kind of foil. So the first thing you see on the page is this undifferentiated stream, well, mostly undifferentiated stream of 16th notes. Just it looks distressingly like a piano exercise your teacher might have given you when you were 10 or whatever. Maybe the first thing to say is this is supposed to be the negative version of the C major, the famous C major prelude. Obviously. We all know it. And that famous opening is 4 bars, a different harmony on each bar, and then returning to the original harmony. A little tiny arc. And it's the same here, C minor. Different harmony, F minor, diminished. And back to the C minor. Of course it sounds completely different, a totally different effect. And part of the reason is, in the C major you feel this kind of strumming, like a beautiful harp or a lute or something, like he's almost brushing over the harmonies in this very gentle way. And here you have these odd notes on the outside, and inside this kind of scurrying neighbor thing. It feels more like an exercise. It feels more definitely like a machine. And there's this wonderful scene in the movie, if you haven't seen it, Triplets of Belleville. I seem to remember that they use this piece when these people are riding their bicycle. And my exercise bike, by the way, is right there. You can't see it off the frame, but that's how I've been keeping sane all this time. And it's that feeling of like the cranking of a machine that won't stop, a pattern that won't be broken. So if the C major prelude has this sort of angelic feeling to it, this has a little bit more of the, forgive me for saying this, demonic, yeah? The monomaniacal. And one thing I love about Bach is how he often starts with a premise that's so clear, and then it's never quite clear, though, how the premise will extend, where it will end up. And you almost feel often that Bach is sort of improvising his way step by step to the shape of the piece. Finding his way, step by step, like in a to-do list, like this must be done, but also step by step, literally, in terms of notes. Like in this case, we start with an E flat on top, A flat major chord going to this chord, those 2 chords, and he says, it's almost like he says, oh, that was good, he tries it again. To another beautiful dominant 7th chord. Okay, and one more time. We're, by the way, inching down, E flat, D, C. And the 3rd time to this dominant 7th chord, but this one takes longer to spool out through this beautiful kind of grindy harmony. That's where we've been headed, E flat major. But before you can become too comfortable or delighted to be in E flat major, he then spools out again another little section just like the last. Through this flat to E flat, and through from C minor. We found our way to this beautiful harmony, and then return. And once we've returned, then immediately Bach begins to destabilize in a subtle way. The bass moves in the middle of the bar. We have a C, our home note, but in the middle of the bar he changes it. He begins to descend in the bass, and he's really headed for... Here's where you begin to feel that there's some dissatisfaction with the pattern, the unbroken, the monomaniacal, the repetition, because you keep doing the pattern and the bass is stuck on this G, but there are all these wonderful dissonances that come against it, what we call a dominant pedal, and you feel the coiled energy of in a way almost impatience, yeah, it's stuckness of the previous F sharp, A flat. Still stuck in the bass. The 16th notes stay, but the shape now changes. It's like almost like trying to break free. And that's 3 bars, and on the 4th bar, all hell breaks loose. A flat, A flat. Now both hands together. Things stop, right? It's marvelous. So he's let it go crazy. He's let the speed just presto, release after all that built up tension, and now he stops it on the diaphragm. And there's this almost tragic kind of recitative. And back to allegro. How did we start with this keyboard exercise and end up in this wild Gothic organist improvising? You know, what got us from there to there? And if you look at the beginning of the piece, the left-hand corner of it, look at the right, it's like completely different pieces, but somehow he's transmuted the energy of one into the other. And another great detail at the end is that when he comes to a stop on that adagio, he does so with an E natural. Now, the defining note of C minor is E flat. That's what makes C minor usually, rather than C major. Yeah. But here, and this is a Beethoven trick too, everything about this is minor except for the E natural. Just this one note takes us to F minor. A flat is very minor. He visits the E flat briefly. E natural again, and this wonderful scale coming down. E again, but everything else is minor, F minor, diminished chord. Beethoven likes to do that in his early C minor pieces too, even in late C minor pieces, that there's this E natural, but everything's minor except for that one note, and there's this kind of quivering ambiguity between the major and the minor, thrilling, which makes it feel not like a non-ending ending, something that's still up. And then the fugue is wonderfully playful. So some of the minor key fugues are tragic, deeply introspective, like kind of contemplations of time. But this one is like a little almost machine made of a few functioning parts that play together in a marvelous way. The subject, the essence of the subject is the difference in a way between A flat and G. Okay? To G, right? Well, maybe we forgot about A flat, no? Now deep down in the subject is this descending scale. But this little syncopated A flat is the sort of destabilizing element, the reminder. And there's this kind of almost nagging, worrying, if you want to say, between G, like you can't solve it, yeah? doing this on E flat, D, E flat. Now, since the subject is basically, the main idea is sort of a descending, this counter subject is marvelous, to ascending scale. And then here, when you have the subject that comes the third time. Listen to the way you hear in the other voices. A flat, A flat, He keeps attacking that note, often on a syncopated. And since most of this fugue subject could feel kind of blocky, it's wonderful to have these syncopated elements. And the other element, the other kind of playful element against the main, is the if everything is sort of a scale, but is not a, what's missing there is this sort of chromatic. There are these marvelous places where he puts in the chromatic. And he has the other ideas against it. This is the most marvelous. And at the very end, he revisits this A flat many times. A flat, A, and the piece stops as if being unable to decide. To A flat. Back to A flat once more. And again, this sort of quivering between major and minor at the end. This is referring back to the ending of the prelude. Not a deep or dark minor, but an incredibly playful, witty in many ways, little piece of brilliant counterpoint. The C-sharp minor Prelude and Fugue, definitely, inarguably, one of the greatest hits of the WTC. A piece about which much has been said and written. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece by Adorno. Maybe I can find the quote later if we have time, but it's a piece of incredible tragic intensity and maybe a little bit difficult to talk about now, and I hope not to talk about it glibly or too analytically. The prelude is a kind of what Kundera calls an endless melody. The basic idea of it is a falling gesture. Should never put your coffee cup on your piano, by the way, so don't do what I'm doing. It's a falling gesture with a little wiggle at the end. Basically, a falling gesture followed by an arpeggio reaching up. And the left hand does the same. Falling, reaching. And the same, the right hand. Same left hand. So it's kind of a little essay on reaching and falling, right? Calling back and forth between the hands. And then he turns it backwards. It was falling and then reaching, and now it's reaching and then falling. Again. One more time. And then the left hand starts up the main idea. And it's beautiful in that sequence, which is so magical. There's the reaching, falling. But of course, beneath the surface, at the bigger structure level, there's this deep falling. That's the kind of stuff Bach loves to build emotional dramas on. There are all kinds of ways in which, you'll take a series of falling gestures, but you'll reach with them. Falling, 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 but you feel it's reaching on. And then the left hand will fall deep and mostly the hands are dialoguing, calling back and forth endlessly, but every so often they come together for a moment. There's an extraordinary passage here. Reaching. And then the left hand gets very active. Classic Bach deceptive cadence on this diminished seventh chord. Just sitting on it. That's how he unwinds the endless thread of the melody through that knot of the deceptive cadence, and then solving the problem and ending up, of course, in the major key. This, as I said, Kundera calls this an endless melody, a very personal, sinuous, winding thing that keeps speaking the sort of melancholy of falling and the desire of reaching, and these beautiful islands of major that he visits in the middle, and then they keep falling back into the minor. So the fugue could not be more different from this personal, almost improvised, melancholy meditation. It's something deeply vocal, structural, austere, made of kind of columns, and of an incredible construction with not a kind of circular, but a gradual rise in intensity to an extraordinary conclusion. And, I don't want to, I could spend hours on this C-sharp minor fugue, as you probably imagine, but I'll try to give you a bird's eye view and some of my thoughts. The subject, and as I say, I don't like that word subject to describe the main ideas of fugues, but we call it the subject. And I guess it's good in a way because it means it's something to think about, an idea to mull over, which is what Bach often does. The subject is 5 notes, which are supposed to correspond, I think, symbolically to the 5 wounds of Jesus on the cross. And the first and the last note are the same. And there's 3 sort of mysterious notes in between. C sharp, a note below, a note above, a note between, and returning. Same. And if I had to say, one of the enigmas of these 5 notes is, where are they going? Which one is the main note? What's the place? How do you interpret it? And there's this also very odd and disturbing interval there, which is not a minor. It's a well, I don't want to get into the music theory weeds about it, but it's an interval that sort of slightly defies conventional understanding, and it also. One trick about this subject is if you remove one note from it, all the mystery is gone. You could, if you just get rid of the second note, you get, which is just banal. If you get rid of the other, the E natural, you end up with just a simple neighbor idea that has no mythic power. You can't remove when it's like a little prime number, a perfect irreducible enigma, this idea. Now, one of the first jobs of a fugue composer is to write a subject, a counter subject, which is the thing that goes under the subject when the second voice comes in. Otherwise, you don't have a fugue, you have a pretty pathetic excuse for a fugue. So the thing that Bach writes when the second voice comes in is this which is not nearly as memorable or expressively quantifiable as the main idea, right? And he does it once more when the third voice comes in. And then he gets rid of it, it just vanishes. That's very unusual for Bach. He only takes now the last few notes of that, what we call the counter subject. This F sharp holding into a dissonance, and these falling notes after. And as the fugue begins to evolve, we have the main subject, but this other idea of the falling notes underneath becomes an important part of the story, almost in a way overshadowing the main idea. Here it is. Now he turns it around, instead of falling notes, climbing notes. Story of these melancholy falling notes and occasional ascents creates a whole drama behind the subject. Usually you just talk about where all the themes appear, But then you see how the main theme, which is so austere, kind of almost anti-expressive or mysteriously expressive, is visited by this more human kind of falling melancholy idea, a sense of almost loss coloring the whole opening. And then there are these two places where it climbs instead, for example, and then it falls again and falls twice as fast. Amazingly, the first time we arrive on a major cadence. One of the miracles of the waltz tempered is how Bach winds back and forth from minor to major, takes the darkest idea and visits it with light. And this is one of the most magical E majors ever, to my mind, ever written. This sense of solace after all this contemplation of sadness and falling away in this one moment. And it's even more beautiful because in an instant he just turns his back on it and goes back to C sharp minor, the original. Now people call this new idea of the second subject. To me it feels less like a subject than a kind of a new motion or a new, but I guess it has a certain idea in it, which is neighboring around, it's sort of hovering around a single note. In the first case, G sharp, then F sharp, and if you look at it closely, all it's doing is a lot of motion concealing a very slow descent. And it's written in order to lock in with the main idea, which is now, if you remember what that is. And the thing you may realize is that this idea is meant to go with just a descending scale. And so after all those falling notes before, the sense of falling away, always this melancholic idea, here is this gradual decline in the other voice, creating this sense of loss behind the scenes, a greater falling. Yeah. So we're going along with this new idea. When suddenly, out of nowhere, a new idea appears. I must say that this... It's very unusual for a fugue to have a new idea a page and a half through. Usually most of the ideas are there by the second or third line. So this is no ordinary fugue. It's a fugue in which there are kind of geological layers. Yeah? And this idea comes, in a way, as you might say, too late into the fugue, right? And it makes up for it with this weird sense of urgency. It's as if interrupting the thing to say some new thing. Add into the texture. So now we have all the three ideas coexisting. This new one, which I hear is a kind of almost trumpet call. You may not feel that way. Certainly it heralds something because the fugue is about to enter a new stage. And you have this idea, and you have do you make this idea feel more unsettling than it did at the beginning? Yeah. You can hear in all of that how the various ideas, sometimes the new idea which interrupted the fugue interrupts itself and keeps what we call stretto over itself. And it adds this endless urgency to itself. The three repeated bum 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 bum. And you may notice the main idea has a repeated note at the beginning and at the end. And this idea has all its repeated notes in the middle. And they have very different feelings, these subjects, you know? The sort of slow, circular, mythical quality of the main idea, returning unto itself always, and this declining, slowly oozing kind of, and this idea which is urgent, and the play of these three ideas, which are meant to kind of coexist in a dialogue that is continually reinventing itself as the fugue goes on. One of the most astonishing places comes at the end in an incredible stretto of all the ideas. There's a marvelous place where the subject does not complete itself. We pause for a moment on that diminished seventh chord to hear the subject not finish itself. The classic Bach dominant seventh chord. Rising now. Again, the subject begins, but then interrupts itself there. Waiting to find a resolution. Should be that, but instead, this astonishing dissonance. One more time, the subject. With the second subject. And what is that major chord at the end? Is there a way to feel comforted by it, by all the things that have, after all the things that have happened in this fugue? It's hard to think of a fugue that has more kind of dramatic intensity and has more to say about its ideas, and the way that the three different elements are kind of locked in a battle with each other, trying to reinterpret each other, trying to find in a way, a kind of mutual understanding, which is constantly postponed. After all the darkness and the intensity of the C-sharp minor Prelude and Fugue, I thought it would be nice to end with something simpler, lighter, more simply joyful, I guess. And I thought maybe two Preludes and Fugues. One, the D major, which is a very unusual piece, and the F-sharp major, which may be my favorite, weirdly. You get these sentimental favorites. The D major Prelude is another one of the mad scientist, I would say, kind of preludes, with this sense of a right hand that won't stop, that can't stop circling around the same pattern in different ways, like a mouse going back and forth in a cage or something, or a hamster. And the bass is sort of hilariously monotonous too, just bouncing back and forth. But as you look at the bass more closely, there's a wonderful little element in it that it's slowly but surely descending, like a water level is dropping. Occasionally it gets stuck at one level, like there's a clog in the drain, and then Bach lets it out a little bit more, and then there's wonderful places where he gets stuck in one place, and that's part of the play of it. So we're on D, for example. Here we are on D. D, C sharp, B, A. Aha, we got down, boom, boom. Then we get stuck on A for a little while. Now down to F sharp. Definitely stuck on F sharp for a long time. Finally, lets it to E. Stuck on E. D. And we've come down a whole octave. Okay, and then he does the same thing again, but with different stopping places. Stuck on D. C, E, stuck on B, B, we were really stuck now, A, G, G, still D, F sharp, E, T, there we are, we're done. We've done 2 octaves, you know? And then the right hand, of course, just this keyboard exercise that will not stop. Even towards the end, when the bass gets stuck, you know, the right hand still is going. Still won't. And then the left hand joins in. And that causes a kind of impasse. I love these humorous diminished 7th chords in Bach. We're in the minor as if it's some sort of anger or frustration. Like, when will this etude be over? Diminished 7th chord. The mad scientist element is this sort of, it won't stop, like on a machine that won't stop. And the delightful, kind of whimsical throwaway conclusion. And then, of course, this French overture fugue. The energy gathering from the first beat. And the second. Kind of a march, regal. Always the joy of the 6th scale degree. And then something that Bach is always doing, the well-tempered, he's wringing all the pleasure he can out of 7th chords, out of a particularly beautiful one. That one. A slightly different one. And he's headed for the best one of all. This is one of the most joyful fugues, the simple pleasures, and then occasionally you have these harmonic moments that are so delicious and unusual. The F sharp major, my sentimental favorite, is in two very similarly witty parts. The prelude is a kind of a constant, what we call a hocket, which is where one hand refuses to be with the other. And it's like a game in which they're kind of chasing each other. So the first thing that happens, the right hand does this, and the left hand follows, but to a different note. I like C sharp, and the left hand likes D sharp. And the right hand keeps trying to be more consonant with the left hand, but then the left hand changes, making it dissonant. The right hand tries to follow, dissonant again. And the right hand keeps trying to be accommodating until the left hand keeps going on. But then the right hand becomes more provocative. The left hand tries to match that. The right hand causes trouble. That's why the game reverses, yeah? And this sort of wonderful sense of children playing or something of that nature. And it's going along, it goes through the minor like so many do. And we're back, more or less. And at this point, Bach does something really special. There's like a little almost like three little balls thrown up ever. So short, brilliant, so much joy in it. And the fugue has this miracle of you have a subject, you have an idea, that's great. He writes beautiful, catchy ideas. This one is marvelous. Then what does the subject need? What is it missing? What other ideas can you bring in to sort of fill the picture and create a complicated texture? Like when you're cooking, you want salt, acid, fat, heat, but you want all those things. You want something to bring something else to the table so that the play of the ideas is constantly fresh. So this idea is just one of those 1-2 punches. A first gesture, landing on the 6th scale, this D sharp, which is left up in the air, and then a little tag. Bum, 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 bum. And this beautiful little neighbor note at the beginning. There's going to be a lot about that later. 6th scale. Fine. Those are the 3 entrances. No big deal. It's incredibly charming and lovely. But now comes a new idea. And the new idea is going to have unexpected consequences. Which is kind of a string idea, going back and forth in 2-note group, with a repeated note in the middle. After this little episode on this 2-note idea, pass between all the voices. Hear it in the bass. Here comes the tag. To wrap all that up. Okay, now we're back to the main idea. And now what happens is, this is the master stroke, Bach takes the 2-note little idea that he's just added and played with, and he rejiggers it to have an ascending scale as part of it. And you feel underneath now the subject this beautiful bum, 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 which you maybe wouldn't realize because the original subject is mostly falling. Bum, ba, 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 and falling down to, right? But now he takes that falling and puts the ascent in the left hand. Then we come back to the two-note idea. Now it's ascending. Now a great episode where he has the two-note idea in the bass. And then this beautiful beginning of the subject in the treble. Just the beginning. He wants to just dwell on that one bit of it and wring the beauty out of it. And now he takes the ascending scale thing again. Now descending. The right hand ascends. One last It's impossible to say how much pleasure this little game of ideas gives me every day. This sort of sense of constantly refreshing joy and recreation of the same thing. Just delving into the idea to find all of its pleasures and possibilities. Thank you for listening to all this talking and thinking about Bach. And thank you to the Greene Space, all the people who helped me make this in my own way. Thank you for being forgiving about my poor, out-of-tune piano and my little family of owls above my head and all the other things. And I hope everyone is well and takes care of themselves. And again, what a pleasure to talk about Bach with all of you.